The day I moved into my new ranch, the sky was impossibly blue, the kind of shade that makes you believe in fresh starts. I had traded my city condo 4 acres of rolling pasture, a wraparound porch, and the smell of pine drifting in the air. It wasn't just a property. It was the kind of home you imagined in daydreams when traffic was bad. My truck was loaded with boxes, a battered guitar case, and 2 rescued barn cats. That morning, I thought my only challenge would be figuring out where to put the horses. I had known this was an HOA-controlled community, but I didn't see that as a threat. To me, an HOA was just some paperwork you signed once, then ignored for the rest of your life. My plan was to keep to myself, pay dues on time, and enjoy the quiet. The ranch backed up to a tree line, and the nearest neighbor was far enough away to feel like privacy. Or so I thought, until the screen door creaked, and I saw her. Karen, short hair sculpted like a helmet, clipboard in hand, sunglasses that hid most of her face. She had the brisk walk of someone who wasn't just on a mission, she was the mission. Without introducing herself, she scanned my driveway like a crime scene. Her eyes landed on my truck, then my trailer, then the stack of lumber tied down in the back. Finally, she spoke. "You can't park that here." At first, I thought she meant it as a neighborly suggestion. It's like, "Hey, you might want to move your truck before the rain comes." I smiled and said, "Just unloading. Give me an hour." Oh, but Karen didn't smile back. Instead, she took out a pen and began scribbling furiously on her clipboard. "That's already a violation," she declared, "and I'll need to take photos for the record." She snapped 3 pictures before I could respond. Still, I wasn't looking for conflict. I gave her a polite nod and kept unloading my things, pretending not to hear her muttering about standards and property values. My plan was to let this one pass, write it off as a quirky neighbor moment. Little did I know, this was only the opening shot in what would become a full-scale war. Karen wasn't just a neighbor, she was the HOA's self-appointed sheriff, and she had me in her sights. By sunset, I'd unpacked enough to make the ranch feel like home. Cats had claimed the windowsills, the fridge was stocked, and my old rocking chair sat perfectly on the porch. I poured a glass of sweet tea and watched the fireflies start to blink across the yard. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps on gravel. Karen again, but this time with a stack of printed papers. "These are your violations," she said, dropping them on my porch table. I glanced at the top page. Improper vehicle storage. Unauthorized exterior color tone. Fence exceeding regulation height. My fence wasn't even built yet. She'd even written me up for temporary disorder in the front yard, meaning the moving boxes I hadn't brought inside yet. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "I moved in today." Karen shrugged. "Rules are rules. Everyone has to follow them." I was tempted to tell her what she could do with those rules, but something stopped me. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and studied her. There was a certain smugness, like she'd just scored points in a game only she understood. And maybe that was the moment I decided I wasn't going to roll over. Not because I cared about the violations, but because Karen clearly wanted to win. And if she wanted a game, I was going to play it better. The next morning, spotted her again, pacing the sidewalk in front of my place like a security guard. She stopped to jot notes whenever a car passed, as if every neighbor was a suspect in her invisible case file. When she reached my driveway, she stared at the stack of hay bales I'd unloaded for the horses. "Agricultural items are not permitted in visible areas," she announced without looking at me. I took a sip of coffee. "It's a ranch," I said. "The hay's kind of the point." It earned me a thin smile that wasn't friendly. "We'll see what the board has to say," she replied, turning sharply on her heel. The board, as I'd soon learn, was just a monthly HOA meeting that she ran with all the ceremony of a Supreme Court session. But I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. If Karen thought she was building a case against me, I was happy to let her think so. Meanwhile, I had bigger plans she would never see coming. By day 3, the violation papers had doubled. This time she brought them in a manila envelope, like she was serving me a lawsuit. "These need to be signed," she said flatly. I flipped through the stack, noting half the infractions weren't even real. Unapproved exterior ornamentation. Referred to a single garden gnome I'd placed by the porch steps. Non-compliant livestock was a note about my 2 cats. I almost laughed, but her stone-faced expression made it funnier. Instead of signing, I slid the envelope back across the table. "I'll look these over," I told her. She tapped her pen against the clipboard, clearly annoyed. "Ellery." "Sign is also a violation," she warned. "Don't want to get off on the wrong foot here." I resisted the urge to tell her my feet were fine, thanks. Instead, I asked her what would happen if someone didn't pay their fines. That question seemed to make her day. Karen launched into a monologue about late fees, liens, and even foreclosure. Possibilities. She spoke about HOA enforcement like a general recounting battlefield victories. When she finally paused for breath, she leaned closer. "People think they can get away with breaking the rules here. They can't. Not while I'm around." It was almost cinematic, the moment a villain reveals their whole philosophy. And I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. What Karen couldn't imagine was that her HOA power existed because I allowed it to. That the management company behind every rule in her precious handbook didn't just work for me, it belonged to me. Every board meeting she attended, every decision she thought she influenced, was ultimately approved at a corporate level she'd never even heard of. And at the top of that chain sat me. But this wasn't the moment to tell her. No, I wanted her to feel completely in control first, to believe she was winning. The sweeter the victory for her now, the sharper the shock would be later. So I thanked her for educating me on the HOA process and watched her strut down the driveway like she'd just conquered enemy territory. I knew I was going to enjoy this far more than I should. The rest of that week became a test of patience. Every time I stepped outside, Karen appeared within minutes, ready to point out another issue. My porch lights were too bright. My driveway gravel was the wrong shade. The flag I hung was 2 inches lower than standard height. It would have been maddening if it wasn't so absurd. I started keeping a mental list, not of her complaints, but of the ways I could flip them back on her. One evening I caught her photographing my backyard from the sidewalk. "Need a better angle?" I asked, leaning on the fence. She ignored me, zooming in on something near the shed. Realized she was taking a picture of my new chicken coop.
"I'll make
"No poultry allowed," she barked, snapping another shot. I tilted my head. Funny, I thought the bylaws said no roosters, no noise complaints and all that. She didn't like that answer. Her face tightened, and she muttered something about interpretations before stalking off. Watching her retreat, I decided it was time to start laying the groundwork for my countermove. Legal prep. That was already in my favor, but psychological prep. I wanted her to feel certain she had me trapped. That way, when the truth came out, the rug wouldn't just be pulled, the whole floor would vanish. The setup required patience, and patience required a good poker face. So I let her keep winning, at least on paper. Every violation she filed, I acknowledged with a nod. Every petty complaint I pretended to take seriously. Meanwhile, I quietly made notes of her own violations, the ones she didn't think applied to her. And trust me, Karen had plenty. By the end of the month, she had filed more than 24 reports against me. The fines alone, if they were real, would have bankrupted a lesser neighbor. She delivered them like trophies each time wearing that satisfied smirk. And each time, I thanked her. Somewhere around the 20th visit, she started to look almost suspicious, but not suspicious enough to slow down. Then came the day she went too far. I had arranged for a small delivery of construction. Equipment, nothing crazy, just a backhoe for a weekend barn project. As soon as the truck pulled in, Karen was out her door and on the phone. Hush. She wasn't yelling, but her voice carried that sharp, self-important edge. I caught the words urgent and non-compliant before she disappeared inside. 15 minutes later, the police arrived. They were polite, professional, and clearly uncomfortable. "We got a call about unauthorized equipment on the property," one officer said. I nodded and asked if they'd like to see the permits, as I handed over the paperwork. Karen reappeared, arms folded, wearing the grin of someone certain justice was about to be served. That was when I decided the waiting game was over. I handed the officers the documents. Watching their expressions shift from official focus to mild confusion, everything was in order, every permit signed and dated, every approval stamped by the very HOA Karen claimed to defend. One officer glanced toward her, then back at me. "It's fine to me," he said. Karen's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, insisting they double-check. That was when I decided to drop a hint, not the full reveal, just a taste. "You can check with the HOA management company," I said casually. "I think they'll confirm I'm allowed to have this equipment." I didn't miss the way Karen's eyes narrowed at the mention of management company. The officers nodded, made a quick radio call, and waited. Karen tapped her foot like a ticking clock. While we stood there, I noticed the way Karen kept glancing at her clipboard, as if it were a holy relic that could save her. She even offered to show the officers her stack of violation forms. I humored her, flipping through them with a politeness reserved for a child's art project. "Ma'am," one of them said gently, "we can't enforce HOA rules. This is a civil matter." The way she blinked was pure disbelief. The conversation ended with the officers wishing me a good afternoon and heading back to their cruiser. Karen stayed rooted in place, clearly unwilling to concede defeat. "This isn't over," she said, her voice sharper now. I met her gaze and smiled. "Of course it's not," I replied. "We've only just begun." That was the truth. I was just getting started. Over the next few days, I let Karen stew. She stopped coming over quite as often, but I could see her through the blinds, watching my property like a hawk. Sometimes she walked her dog past my driveway multiple times in an hour just to peer in. I made sure to keep things borderline, compliant enough to keep her guessing. The uncertainty was bait, and she took it every time. I also started laying traps, harmless ones, but effective. I left a single ladder leaning against the shed for 2 days, knowing she'd photograph it. I set out lawn chairs in an unapproved configuration, which was just me turning them slightly off alignment. I even parked my truck half a foot closer to the sidewalk than usual. Sure enough, each one landed in my mailbox as an official violation. What Karen didn't realize was that every complaint she filed went through a chain of approval. That chain ended at my desk, 2 states away, where my company processed HOA records. I'd built my career in property management, slowly acquiring controlling stakes in dozens of companies. Eventually, I merged them under one umbrella, mine. I didn't just oversee this HOA, I owned it. By Friday, her latest batch of complaints was sitting in my inbox at the corporate office. I took my time reviewing them, sipping coffee while reading her dramatic descriptions. Each one was a mix of exaggeration and outright fabrication. Normally, my staff would reject them before they ever reached the board. But this time, I had a different plan. I approved every single one. Approving them wasn't about giving her what she wanted. It was about letting her think she'd won. She'd feel invincible, certain she was pushing me toward the brink. Then, when she was at peak confidence, I'd flip the entire game. It's always more satisfying when the fall is from a greater height. And with Karen, the higher the better. The turning point came on Saturday morning. I set out early to run errands, only to find Karen waiting near my gate with a smug expression. "The board meets Monday," she announced. "I think we'll be discussing some serious consequences for your behavior." She delivered the line like it was a death sentence. I pretended to look concerned, but inside I was grinning. "Thanks for the heads up," I told her. "I'll be sure to attend." She gave a short nod and walked off, clearly satisfied. As I watched her go, I imagined her spending the whole weekend rehearsing her speech for the meeting. She'd probably have visual aids, maybe even a slideshow, of my supposed infractions. The idea almost made me laugh out loud. Monday evening arrived and I drove to the community center where the board met. Karen was already there, standing at the front like a prosecutor, ready to present her case. The room was half full with residents, most of them looking bored, sipping coffee from styrofoam cups. Karen spotted me and smirked as if she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. The meeting began with routine items, landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, holiday decorations. Karen fidgeted through it all, impatient for her turn. Finally, the chairperson said, "Next, we have a resident complaint regarding multiple violations." Karen nearly leaped out of her seat. She launched into her speech, detailing every offense I'd committed since moving in. She had photos, dates, even a color-coded chart of non-compliance trends. The presentation was so over the top, it almost became performance art. A few neighbors rolled their eyes. One even stifled a laugh. But Karen powered through, convinced she was building an airtight case. When she finished, she turned toward me. With a triumphant smile, "Care to respond?" she asked. I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch just enough to build tension. "Yes," I said. "But first, I'd like to clarify something for the record." I pulled a folder from my bag and opened it. Inside were documents, corporate filings, ownership records, and the original purchase agreement for the management company. I placed them on the table for everyone to see. "These are the papers showing I own the HOA," I said evenly. For a moment, the room was silent. Then came the whispers, the shifting in chairs, the sideways glances. Karen blinked rapidly, as if the words didn't make sense. "That's impossible," she finally said, her voice higher now. I turned the folder so she could read the company name and my signature. "Not only is it possible," I replied, "it's the reason I approved all your complaints. I wanted to see how far you'd go." Her face drained of color, and for the first time since I'd met her, Karen had nothing to say. The board chair cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to proceed. I broke the tension with a smile. "Effective immediately, I'm introducing a new rule. No frivolous complaints. Penalty, $500 per violation." Gasps and chuckles rippled through the room. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. Before the meeting ended, I handed the chairperson a separate document, a notice removing Karen from any HOA committee positions. "We appreciate her enthusiasm," I said, "but it's time for a fresh approach." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was genuine. Karen gathered her papers with trembling hands and left without another word. I didn't see her for the rest of the week. Walking back to my truck, I felt the warm satisfaction of a game played well. It wasn't about revenge so much as balance, restoring the peace that Karen had disturbed. Still, I couldn't help but enjoy the poetic justice. She'd used the HOA as a weapon against me, only to learn I was the one holding the sword all along. The blade had just turned. For a few blessed days after the board meeting, life on the ranch was quiet. The air smelled like cut hay. The evenings were filled with crickets, and I almost forgot about Karen entirely. The neighbors, who had once kept their distance, now waved when they drove past. A few even stopped to chat, offering congratulations, in careful, amused tones. But in the back of my mind, I knew the silence wouldn't last. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. I could picture her pacing her living room, replaying the meeting over and over, searching for a way to rewrite the ending. She'd probably called her friends, spinning the story so she was the victim. Maybe she was even looking up obscure bylaws, hoping to find something she could twist against me. It was just a matter of time before she made her move. That move came on Thursday afternoon. I was mending a section of fence when I saw her car creeping down the road, stopping in front of my gate. The engine idled for a moment before she rolled down the window. "Enjoying your little victory?" she called, her tone sharp but brittle. I leaned on the fence post, waiting to see where this was going. She didn't waste time. "Owning the HOA doesn't mean you're above the law," she said, chin lifted like a challenge. "There are county regulations too, and I've been making some calls." I could almost hear the capital letters in her voice. I smiled. "By all means," I replied. "Call whoever you need to." That seemed to throw her off for a second. But she recovered quickly. What she didn't realize was that county inspectors and I had already met months before I bought the ranch. I'd made sure every building, fence, and water line was fully permitted and documented. My paperwork was airtight, something I knew would frustrate her to no end. Still, I admired the persistence. Karen wasn't giving up. She was just changing battlefields. The following morning, a white county truck pulled up in front of my property. The inspector was polite, clipboard in hand, clearly expecting some sort of disaster. We walked the fence line together, checked the outbuildings, even measured the driveway slope. "Everything's in compliance," he said finally, making a note. Honestly, I'm not sure why I was called out here. I gave him a knowing smile. As the inspector drove away, I caught sight of Karen watching from her porch. Her arms were folded, her face tight, and even from a distance I could sense her frustration. That was when I decided to turn her persistence into entertainment. If she wanted to play games, I'd give her more games than she could keep up with. The rules, of course, would be mine. I began with subtle changes. Nothing illegal, but enough to spark her curiosity. A single pumpkin placed in the middle of my yard, flagpole erected overnight with a bright yellow flag she'd never seen before. Wooden crates stacked neatly by the barn, each labeled fragile in bold letters. I didn't have to wait. Long before she came snooping with her phone camera, neighbors started noticing too. But instead of siding with Karen, they played along. One afternoon, Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down dropped off a tray of cookies and whispered, "Keep it up. We're loving the show." Even the retired couple across the street began setting up lawn chairs when Karen's car slowed by my gate, like they were watching a live soap opera. The whole street had quietly turned against her. That shift in public opinion only seemed to fuel Karen's desperation. She stopped pretending her visits were casual and began showing up with folders, as if assembling a case. Sometimes she'd bring a friend, both of them peering over my fence and taking notes. I didn't mind, in fact. I started leaving props out just for them to discover. Each one harmless, each one a waste of their time. The most fun came when I staged a delivery of oversized, official-looking boxes. A buddy of mine who runs a shipping company dropped them off, each stamped with mock government seals I'd designed myself. They were empty, of course. But from the way Karen gawked, you'd think I was storing state secrets in my barn. That night, her lights stayed on past midnight. I imagined her on the phone, whispering to anyone who'd listen. By the end of the month, her efforts had backfired completely. Every neighbor she'd once intimidated was now openly laughing about her investigations. At the local cafe, I overheard 2 residents betting on what she'd accuse me of next. Even the mailman had a running joke about Karen Patrol when he dropped off my letters. The power she'd clung to so tightly was slipping through her fingers, one chuckle at a time. But I knew Karen well enough to expect one last swing. People like her didn't just fade quietly. They looked for a final act, something they could point to as proof they'd been right all along. And when that swing came, I wanted to be ready. Not just to block it, but to turn it into the kind of ending no one would forget. Karen's final strike came. On a Saturday morning when the air smelled like rain and the street was unusually quiet, I spotted her minivan parked crooked near the community center, trunk open, boxes stacked inside. First I thought it was just another one of her evidence dumps. But then I noticed the banner, Emergency Town Hall Meeting Property, Crises. My name was on the flyer in bold red letters. Curiosity won over coffee, so I wandered down. The parking lot was already filling with residents drawn by the dramatic wording. Karen stood near the entrance, greeting people with the solemnity of a disaster relief worker. She handed out packets. Each one, no doubt, a greatest hits compilation of my so-called violations. When she spotted me, her eyes narrowed, but she kept smiling for her audience. Inside, she'd gone all out. There was a projector screen, a stack of printed photos, and even a podium with a microphone. She started with a theatrical sigh, telling everyone how deeply concerned she was about the degradation of community standards. Her voice trembled with righteous indignation as she flipped through slides, my ladder leaning against the shed. The chicken coop, the yellow flag. Each image drew less outrage and more muffled laughter. She didn't seem to notice the shift in the room. In fact, she doubled down, introducing her piece de resistance, a grainy, zoomed-in shot of the mock government seal boxes by my barn. "We have no idea what's in these," she said gravely. For all we know, they could be hazardous. Someone in the back whispered, or just empty, and a ripple of chuckles spread. Karen's jaw tightened. That was my cue. I stood and walked to the podium, motioning for the projector to display a document from my folder. It was a certificate. Not just any certificate, but a custom Karen Appreciation Award for her tireless efforts in community surveillance. The room erupted in laughter as I read it aloud, thanking her for unpaid investigative services and creative storytelling under the guise of civic duty. Her face flushed crimson. Instead of leaving it there, I invited everyone outside. For a special reveal, we walked to my ranch, where the mysterious boxes were stacked neatly. One by one, I opened them to show they contained inflatable pink flamingos, dozens of them. Within minutes, my front yard was a sea of plastic birds bobbing in the breeze. The neighbors cheered, cameras flashed. Karen spun on her heel and stormed off. From that day forward, the flamingos stayed not as a violation, but as a new neighborhood tradition. People began adding their own. Flamingos in hats, flamingos in Hawaiian shirts, even a giant inflatable one that appeared every holiday. Karen stopped attending meetings altogether. Her authority dissolved not by force, but by ridicule. The power she'd tried to wield became the punchline she couldn't escape. As for me, I got my peace back. The ranch returned to its quiet rhythms, the only interruptions being friendly visits or the occasional prank from neighbors who remembered the flamingo incident. Karen still lived a few houses down, but she avoided my street entirely. In the end, the war ended not with a battle, but with a party one she could never live down. And I wouldn't have it any other way. It started with a single photo on social media, a wide shot of my front yard filled with pink flamingos, sunlight bouncing off their plastic feathers. Someone from the neighborhood had tagged it with the caption, "HOA war ends in flamingo victory." Within hours, the post had hundreds of shares. By the next morning, it had thousands. The internet had found its newest obsession. The memes came fast. My face photoshopped onto a flamingo's body. Corinne depicted as a cartoon villain fleeing a sea of pink. Someone even made a fake movie poster, Revenge of the Ranch Owner, based on a true HOA story. Dastaway storying me screenshots. From Twitter, Instagram, even Reddit threads, where strangers debated whether the flamingos were real. They were very real. Local reporters arrived first, parking their vans down the road and walking up with big smiles.
"We heard about your flamingo."
"Takeover," one said, microphone in hand. I explained the short version of the story, careful not to name Karen outright. But I didn't have to. The internet had already pieced it together. By evening, her porch light was off, blinds drawn tight. The national outlets weren't far behind. One morning, I opened my gate to find a crew from a popular talk show standing there, asking if I'd be willing to do a live interview. They'd brought their own flamingo props, which they scattered across my driveway for the camera. "It's not every day an HOA story makes people laugh instead of cry," the host said, grinning. I had to agree. The attention sparked something unexpected. Mail, letters, postcards. Even small packages started arriving from all over the country. People sent me miniature flamingos, HOA horror stories of their own, and thank you notes for fighting the good fight. My barn filled with boxes, each one a reminder that this had grown far beyond our little neighborhood. The flamingo incident had become a movement. Meanwhile, the neighbors leaned into it completely. The Hendersons down the road painted their mailbox pink. The retired couple installed a weather vane shaped like a flamingo. Even the local cafe changed its chalkboard menu to read, "Proudly serving flamingo-friendly coffee." Every time I passed through town, someone shouted, "Long live the flamingos." The energy was contagious. Karen, of course, hated every second. She tried to ignore it at first, but the more the flamingos multiplied, the harder it became. Eventually, she broke her silence by writing a long, angry letter to the editor of the local paper. She called the whole thing a mockery of community standards and accused me of encouraging disorder. The editor printed it right next to a wasfu photo of a flamingo wearing sunglasses. If she hoped the letter would rally supporters, she miscalculated badly. Instead, people started leaving small flamingos in her yard under cover of night. At first, She removed them immediately, but they came back faster than she could collect them. By the end of the week, her front lawn had 6 flamingos, none of them placed there by me. It was neighborhood mischief at its finest. The tipping point came when a famous YouTuber showed up unannounced, filming a flamingo tour of the area. He interviewed neighbors, posed with the giant inflatable bird in my yard, and even staged a mock peace treaty signing. The video racked up millions of views in days. I didn't think it was possible for Karen to turn redder than she had at the town hall. But I was wrong. Opportunities followed. A novelty company reached out, offering to sell limited edition HOA Flamingo Defense Squad t-shirts with a cut of profits going to a homeowners' rights charity. A travel blog listed our street as one of the top 10 quirkiest neighborhoods in America. One TV producer even floated the idea of a reality show. I declined, but I admit I thought about it. Despite the attention, I made a point to keep the story's tone light. My goal had never been to humiliate Karen permanently, just to defang her overreach. But the viral wave had a life of its own now, and people everywhere projected their own HOA frustrations onto it. I became an accidental symbol for pushing back, which honestly was fine by me. As weeks passed, the flamingos became less about Karen and more about joy. Families drove in from nearby towns to take photos in front of the yard. Kids posed next to the biggest inflatable bird, grinning like they'd found buried treasure. The air of tension that had hung over the neighborhood was gone, replaced by something closer to celebration. Even the HOA meetings felt lighter. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the flamingos sway in the breeze. The cats lounged nearby, unbothered by the occasional passerby snapping pictures. I thought about how strange it was that a petty HOA feud had turned into all this. Sometimes you don't choose the fight chooses you. And sometimes it gives you plastic birds. Karen still lives down the road, though I hardly see her now. Word is she spends most of her time gardening in the backyard, far from the pink tide she can't control. Every now and then I catch a glimpse of her peeking through the blinds when tourists stop for photos. I can't tell if she's furious or secretly impressed. Either way, the war is over, and the flamingos won. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter, crisp and formal, bearing the seal of an HOA from 3 states away. It was addressed to me directly, not the local board, and the tone was unmistakably hostile. The writer, one Gerald Whitmore, HOA president, accused me of eroding the integrity of HOA governance nationwide. He demanded a meeting to discuss the damage. I couldn't help but laugh. Gerald, as it turned out, was something of a celebrity in HOA circles. A quick search revealed news articles praising his uncompromising enforcement and commitment to uniformity. He'd fined residents for leaving garden hoses out, for painting mailboxes the wrong shade of black, even for hanging laundry to dry in their own yards. In other words, he was Karen with a better suit. And now, apparently, he wanted me gone. His letter proposed a showdown of sorts, a public debate on HOA ethics and compliance. The venue, a convention center in his hometown. The date, 3 weeks from Friday. I could have ignored him, but something about his pompous phrasing made my competitive side stir. If Gerald wanted a battle, I'd give him one, but it would be on my terms, not his. I reached out to the event organizers, offering to participate under one condition. The debate would be streamed live online. They agreed, likely thinking it would boost viewership. Meanwhile, I quietly arranged for a few surprises. My team at the management company dug into Gerald's HOA records, and what they found was enlightening. It seemed the model community he'd bragged about wasn't so pristine after all. The day of the debate arrived with a crowd bigger than I expected. Residents from Gerald's neighborhood filled the front rows, wearing matching polos with the HOA logo. My side of the audience was more colorful literally, as several people had dressed in flamingo pink. I stepped onto the stage with my folder of documents, nodding politely at Gerald as he adjusted his tie. He gave me a look that could curdle milk. He opened with a long-winded speech about order, property values, and the slippery slope of noncompliance. Every sentence dripped with self-importance. The audience clapped politely, though I noticed a few yawns. When my turn came, I began not with words, but by projecting a photo of my flamingo-filled yard onto the giant screen. The laughter that followed was instant and loud. Gerald's frown deepened. I kept my tone calm as I explained that HOA should serve communities, not rule them. I spoke about flexibility, fairness, and the dangers of letting power go unchecked. Then I shifted to the document's proof of arbitrary fines, consistent rule enforcement, and even personal exemptions Gerald had granted himself. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I laid out the receipts. Gerald tried to recover, insisting the records were taken out of context, but the damage was done. One of his own residents stood up and shouted, "That's my house. You fined me for planting roses." The room erupted, half the audience turning on him, the other half gleefully recording the moment. The live stream chat exploded with flamingo emojis and phrases like HOA exposed. By the time the debate ended, Gerald looked like a man who'd just realized the tide was against him. The organizers thanked us both, but the applause for me was louder, warmer. As I stepped off the stage, people crowded around, asking for photos, telling me their own HOA horror stories. I left the building with a sense that Gerald's reign wouldn't last much longer. Back at the ranch, I found a package waiting on my porch. Inside was a single plastic flamingo, painted gold, with a note, "For services to homeowners everywhere." From a grateful neighbor of Gerald's, I set it in the yard with the others where it caught the evening light. Another battle. Another reminder that sometimes the best revenge comes with a laugh and a bird on a stick.